In this section, we're going to do a deep dive into functions and how to use them. But first, we're going to kick things off by talking about why we need functions, what purpose they serve within our JavaScript application. Then we're going to talk about a specific special property of functions that's very valuable to us in making our applications, called a closure. We're going to dive into that, how to use closures, and why they matter. Then we'll move on to how to make more reliable functions, more predictable functions, with the help of a feature called default parameters. Then we'll see how to cut down on our code and make even shorter functions using a newer variant of writing functions called an arrow function. Then we'll talk about some advanced concepts and working with functions, namely partial application, and that allows our functions to just be responsible for one thing. We've got a lot to cover in this section, but at this point, we're going to really start diving into the more fun, advanced parts of JavaScript. And all that starts with functions. Quite often we need to perform a similar action in many places in our program. Let's say we're making a chat application. At the moment, we have the following information. We have our chat participants listed as user 1 and user 2. But naturally, a chat application is worthless if users aren't able to send messages back and forth. And that message needs to have dynamic content that we can reuse. It would be impossible to have such an app if we couldn't provide a way to at any time insert the user's name and message that they're sending without writing everything out manually each time. So using what we have here, we need to create a kind of program within our program that we can execute as many times as we need. When we have a need for such dynamic behavior and to perform it as many times as we need without repetition, we need to use a function. You might not have noticed it, but we've been using functions from the beginning. Functions like alert and prompt that are available on the window object. We can pass certain values to them. In the case of alert and prompt and console log, we saw that we could pass them strings. So for console log, we could pass it the string hello world. And we can reuse this function as many times as we want. So as you see here, for console log, a function is a process which takes some input, in this case the text hello world, and produces some output. I like to think of functions as a kind of machine. This machine can accept something, some input, and does something with it. It either performs an action or returns some data. And arguably it can do both of these things. All we need to do to get these reusable machines to work is press the button, or what looks like a button. That is to take the name of our function and provide a set of parentheses after it. So how do we make our own functions? Functions are created or declared with the function keyword. Then after it is the name of the function. Then the input it takes is going to be between a set of parentheses, and this set of parentheses is called the parameters. Think of these parentheses like an opening to pass stuff to our machine that it needs. And where is it passed to? The function body, which we create with a set of curly braces. And this is where we put the code that we want the function to run every time we press the button to make it run. And this is also known as calling our function or executing it. So right here, we've made a function named echo, which will echo or repeat back to us whatever we provide to it as the input by console logging the value that we pass the function. So to use echo, just have to reference it by name, and we call it by pressing the button and providing some data for it to work. We need to provide a value that this input
So it's going to be,
is going to be set to. And we do that by calling our functions
chat
with some data. And this data is
like
called
what
arguments.
the user will
We can
type
think of
into
passing
this.
an argument to be the equivalent here of setting a local variable input to some value with the equals sign. So if we were to pass 42 as the argument, it's going to be provided as the value for the input parameter and then logged.
All right.
So now, if we run this code, we call our function, the input of 42, we get 42 provided to the console, which makes sense. But note a couple of things here. When we're passing arguments, the argument will only exist within the scope or context of the function itself, not the outer scope outside the function. Also note that we can declare variables within a function. And similar to past arguments, variables declared within a function will be scoped to that function. In other words, a variable made in a function only exists inside that function. So if we were to make a local variable inside echo, say called greeting, and then if we were to console log greeting in the scope above, what do you think we'd get?
Less greeting.
We get a reference there. Greeting is not defined. Why? Because greeting, as I mentioned, is scoped to the echo function. This might be pretty straightforward to you, but this is very important. We refer to this feature of all variables within functions as being function scoped, similar to how let and const variables were block scoped. But note that a function can access outer variables too. So if we were to move greeting to any scope outside of echo, we could still use it inside our function. So let's say the greeting variable is set to the string hi, and we want to console log our greeting and the input here within our function echo. So we'll use template literals to interpolate both greeting and input. When we run this code here, what will we get?
Hi 42.
We see hi 42. So we see that we can
Makes
use
sense.
input passed directly to functions through arguments, as well as through variables and data in any outer scopes. But what if instead of having greeting be a variable, we passed it as an argument?
Yeah, parameters.
Note that we can pass as many arguments or individual pieces of data to functions by separating them by commas. So we could pass the string hi to our function as a second argument and remove where we used it earlier. So when we run this code, what do you think we'll get? We just get 42.
Because we don't have
The reason for this
parameters.
is that JavaScript ignores any additional arguments
Right.
passed to a function call
Makes sense.
for which there are no corresponding
sense.
parameters.
Let me
So
put
now
my
to
chat
use
into here.
the second argument, we have to create a second parameter whose data is going to be assigned to. So we'll call this greeting now and use it just like we did before. So when we run this, now we see hi 42, like we were expecting. Now let's talk briefly about order here. Note here that the arguments that we're passing must correspond in number and in order to the function's parameters. The first argument will always be passed to the first parameter, second argument
Right.
to the second parameter, etc. And finally, one of the most important things about functions that we haven't touched on just yet is that they can return values. This means we can use the output of functions to immediately put their resulting data into variables. For example, at this moment, how would we use the echo function here to put our created text that we're logging to the console right now into a new variable called result? So first we can create a variable called result up here. Without the console log, how would we take our string from the echo function and put it in result? Think about this and see if you can come up with an answer.
Result equal to.
Well, with our result variable that we
So here's going to be result equal this, and then we run it just run result. Right, and then we console log result. Log result. Okay, there we go. So this basically when what we can do with this is we basically create a chat, like a messenger type of chat application, where the input here is going to be going to refer into a text box. Here in HTML, what we can do is we call the text box, and then we take the value and put it into a variable called input, and then we call input parameters. I'm assuming, yeah. What we can do is here is the input is going to be the variable that is the DOM element that is referred to the text box, right? So let's say, yeah, then hi something, and we can do a lot of things with this. This is the fundamentals of a chat application. I don't know what it called, but it's a chat box.
We've declared here, you might have tried assigning it to the string that we created in the function. And then to see if the assignment worked when we called the function, we could console log result after executing echo. And when we run this, we see that it works. We still get high 42, but it's a very weak solution. Why is this? Because we rely on the result variable being reassignable. We couldn't use a solution with const, for example. What we're trying to do is take the value from the function body, which is in the function scope, and put it into an outer scope out here. But it's not that difficult. Instead, we can just return the string from echo using the return keyword, which enables us to put the string immediately into a new variable once we make this function call. So we get our return value when we call the function. So that means we can take our variable result and immediately initialize it right here when we call echo. So now when we run our code, we still get...
So return greeting and input. So let's go. After running this, it's going to return a greeting and input. JavaScript const result equal. So basically just plug into here and here. No, here and here. And input first. So this is a pretty new way. I haven't tried to do this. Alright, so we do this. Greeting, return greeting.
Get high 42. So this works just as well and is a lot more readable, especially if you refer back to our lesson on const and how it makes our code more readable. One more word about return values from functions is that even if we don't use the return keyword or intend to return a value from a JavaScript function, the function will return undefined by default. This is just something to be aware of and is visible if we remove the return keyword from echo temporarily. When we ran this code, we get undefined. Now with our deep dive into JavaScript functions, let's come back to the beginning, the problem that we had at the beginning, and solve our original problem of our chat app. How can we create a function which displays a message from either one of our users by using the message string as the template to display first the user's actual name and their message text itself? See if you can write out such a function on your own.
Say it again.
and how it makes our code more readable. One more word about return values from functions is that even if we don't use the return keyword or intend to return a value from a JavaScript function, the function will return undefined by default. This is just something to be aware of and is visible if we removed the return keyword from echo temporarily.
Visible.
When we ran this code, we get undefined. Now with our deep dive into JavaScript functions, let's come back to the beginning, the problem that we had at the beginning, and solve our original problem of our chat app. How can we create a function which displays a message from either one of our users by using the message string as the template to display first the user's actual name and their message text itself? See if you can write out such a function on your own.
Right, so what we can do is function, we call this message. Right, that is probably not a good name for this function, but doesn't matter. User, const user 1, user 2. Alright, we just do two function, one for user 1 and one for user 2. Then we comment message message user 1 say message content. Yeah, let's just do message and then do this. So we do return here user 1 user 1 this and then message okay, comments, and let's try and do a message. What we can do is console log here too as well. No, I don't think so. Let's do const message content message content const message. Do I delete this because user 1 const message yeah, let's move this down here. User 1, so it's going to be alright, the same as this, but we need to do here message open parenthesis open bracket. It's going to be 42, so we'll user 1 it's going to be read and dog read then message content is going to be hello. Right, return, oh, this is the return text, right. user 1 say message content. Here's message content. Message content. Then we do this and we console.log message. Try this. Message has already been declared. Yeah, let's try and call this input. And console log input. Let's try and doc this out. User read say hello. Yeah, it's pretty good. Return user. I know it's not going to work, but here we have a really awkward. I would name it back to 1 and 2, and here user 1. And we basically do the same things for user 2. Oi. 2 say input it's supposed to be user 2, return user 2. Console log message. It's not going to do. Alright, does this work? User read say hello. Yeah, I don't think we even need this. Just return this. And then we do input. What we can do is user 1. Can we call a because this is going to match with this user 1. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. Let's just try it. Hello. Try it. Not going to work. Right, so basically here we need to do 1 and then it's all match. Console.log. We do a input. Can we do console log within a user 1? The comments. Hello. Try it. User read say hello. Alright, so this could work as well. Input user 1. 1. Then we copy another function called this input user 2. 2. 2. And then 2. And say hi. Input user 1, input user 2. Alright. User note say hello, user read say yes. Let's see the solution.
Well, first, we want to declare a function with the function keyword, and we'll give it a name. And we usually name functions according to what responsibility they have in our app. In this case, we're using it to send a user's message. So we could call it maybe send user message or create user message. We need to add our parentheses to hold our parameters to pass any necessary input to our function. And then we'll create our function body with curly braces. And here perform whatever action or return whatever output we need here, or both. So what do we want to do here? We want to take in a user and their message. So we can provide both of these values as arguments. So we'll call our function send user message, and for the first message, maybe user1 will write it. So we have this available as an outer variable, and it's going to be passed first to our function. And then for the second argument, we're going to provide their message, say maybe the text, hey there, to the other user. And to pass through the input to our function, we need to create corresponding parameters for these arguments, which we'll name user and text.
User and text.
And then we can use interpolation to provide them to our message variable.
A lot easier to read.
Now we could create a variable here as we saw, but we really just want to display this message to our other user. So we could copy the string and then interpolate the user that we're getting passed to the function, and then the text. And then to display this message, we could either return it, but I will simply console log it.
Console log.
When we run this, we see user read says, hey there. And since we know that this function can be called as many times as we like, let's have the second user, user2, respond with, what's up?
What's up?
Great.
Right.
So now we have the working start to a chat application, all made possible with the help of functions and their ability to let us reuse this bit of functionality around our app.
User. Okay. So like reusability is really good.
Hey, it's time for you to write your very first
First
function.
function.
So, what I want you to do is write a function, split bill, that lets you know how much you need to pay to split a bill between you and your friends. So the function should return a message with a number. So for example, each person needs to pay this much. And I'm gonna test the code here afterwards with these three console logs. The first parameter in the function should be the size of the bill, and the second one should be the number of people. So these three console logs should log out how much each person needs to pay in these three situations. So go ahead and write your code right here, and I'll show you the solution afterwards.
Right, so what we do is function, we do split bills, we do total, is it? Total, and none. Number of people. Right, so then what we do is we console log we take the total, here split bills. Right, if split bill lets you know how much you need to pay to split any bill between you, and your friend. It should return a message. Right, so we return call this you should pay. Then we do total divided by, so the first one divided by the second one, so 5. Total slash num. Can that do? I'm not too sure. Let's say pay cons pay equal total slash num, and we do this, and we do console. It should no. Write a function split bill that lets you know how much you need to pay for to split any bill between you and your friend. But there's parameters, so let's try this. And return you should pay here pay A5. Yeah, there we go. So we can take the parameters in here and like do something with it. Right, I see 5, 4. Okay, there we go.
Here, we're going to calculate the sum that each person needs to pay. For that, we have to escape out, divided by people. And this string will be returned with this expression evaluated. So if we run the code, you can see each person needs to pay 5, 4, and a given number. But that's
okay.
Let's say we're building a social media app like Twitter or Facebook, and we want each user to be able to like different posts in it. As a result, we have two things so far in our app. Let's say we have a like count variable, and this is just a number stored in a variable right now, initialized to 0. And we have a function to update it, and we'll call this handle like posts, since our apps are going to consist of posts. So it's going to take like count, and it's going to increment it by 1. And we can do that with the plus equals 1 expression that we have here. And then at the end, we'll call handle like post, and we can console log what the resulting value of like count is. So when we run this code, we see that like count is incremented to 1. And this works because we know that functions can access variables outside of it. In other words, functions can access any variables defined in any parent scope. But there's a problem with this code. Since like count is in the global scope and not in any function, like count is a global variable. Global variables can be used and changed by any other bit of code or function in our app. For example, what if we, after our function, mistakenly set our like count to 0? Naturally, when we run this, our like count can never be incremented from 0. So when only one function needs a given piece of data, it just needs to exist locally, that is, within that function. We've already covered the issue with leaving things in the global scope that don't need to be there. So now let's bring in like count, the variable, into handle like post. And for it to work as before and get the like count's value, we also need to bring in our console log into the function as well. When we run this code again, we see it's incremented as before. So now our users should be able to like a post as many times as they want. So to simulate that, let's execute handle like post a few more times. But when we run this code, we look at the console, we see there's a bit of a problem. we would expect to see the like count keep increasing from 1 to 2 to 3, but we just see 1 displayed in the console 3 times. Why is that? We'll take a second, look at our code in its current state, and explain why like count is no longer being incremented. Let's look at our handle like post function and see how it's working. Every time we use it, every time we run it, we're recreating this like count variable, which is being initialized to 0. So no wonder we can't keep track of the count between function calls. It keeps being set to 0 each time, and then it's being incremented by 1, and that's it. So we're stuck here. Our variable needs to live inside of the handle like post function, but we can't preserve the count. We can't have it increment from 1. We need something that allows us to preserve or remember the like count between function calls. What if we tried something that might look a bit strange at first? What if we tried putting another function in our handle like post function? And here, let's name our function add like. And the reason for this is because it's going to be responsible for incrementing the like count variable now. And note that this inner function doesn't have to have a name. It can be an anonymous function, and in most cases it is. We're just giving it a name so we can more easily talk about it and what it does. So add like is now going to be responsible for incrementing our like count. We'll bring this line into add like to do so. And now what if we were to call this add like function in handle like post? Just like this. If we run it, again, we're going to increment our like count to 1 3 times. But every time we do so, we're going to have the same result as before. The like count variable is going to be created and then destroyed at the end. So again, we lose our value. But instead of calling add like within its enclosing function, that is, within handle like post, what if we called it outside of the function? So this seems even stranger. And how would we do that? Well, we know at this point that functions return values. For example, we could return our like count value at the end of the add like function. And similarly, we can return the add like function within handle like post. So we can just say return function add like. Now this may look bizarre, but this is allowed in JavaScript. We can use functions just like any other value. So a function can be returned from another function. And this is what enables us to call add like not within handle like post, but outside of it, out here. But how would we do that? Well, think about this code for a minute and see if you can figure it out yourself. See if you can execute add like in the outer scope. Well, first, to better see what's happening when we're returning add like from handle like post, let's console log handle like post. And when we run it, we get as the return value add like, which is what we'd expect when we return this function. So now, if we wanted to use add like, we could just put it in a variable. If we can return a function from another function, we can put it in a variable as well. So let's put the add like function that we're getting into a variable called like. And finally, we can call like. And when we do, I'm going to console log its return value since it's returning the like count. And we'll do this a couple more times. So when we run this code, we see 1, 2, 3.
Why is it in a function? Can we do this? Add like 2? Missing. I'm assuming it's going to be add like 2. It's going to be 3 add like 2. That's like count equals 0, return. So it's going to return this function. This whole function going to return this add like. But the add like is going to return the like count. So like count is right now is 1. And then we call add like. Why would we call add like over here? Because we already returned this. What if we don't return this? Add like. I'd like to...
We see that the like count is being incremented from its previous value. So what in the world happened here? Well, we figured out how to call the add_like function from outside the scope it was defined in. We did that by returning the inner function from the outer one and storing a reference to it named like to be able to call it as many times as we wanted. So that was our implementation, of course.
That's kind of
How did
awkward.
we preserve the value of like count between function calls? Well, let's go through the code line by line. First, the handle like post outer function is executed when we call it, and that creates an instance of the inner function add_like. And this function, as we know from basic scoping rules, this function has access to any variables that are declared in the outer scope. Or another way of expressing this is that this function closes over this like count variable and can access it within its body and be able to make changes to it. And then since we returned add_like, it was provided as the return value handle like post. It's provided to this like variable, and then we were able to call it outside the scope that it was defined in. And when like finishes running, normally we would expect all of its variables to be garbage collected, that is, removed from memory. In other words, we'd expect like count to go away, just like it did before, but it doesn't. What's the reason for this? What keeps our variable around after handle like post has been executed? The reason for this is called closure. Since the inner function instance is still alive and assigned to like, the closure is what's preserving the like count variable that it's closing over. You would think that having a function written inside another function would just be like a function written in the global scope, but it's not. This is why closure makes functions so powerful, because it's a special property that isn't present in anything else in the language. And to better appreciate closures, we have to understand how JavaScript treats variables that are normally created. You might have wondered what happens to variables when you say, close your page, or go to another page within an app. How long do variables stick around? Global variables live until the program is thrown away. For example, when you close the window, they're around for the life of the program. However, local variables have short lives. They're created when the function's invoked, when the function's executed, and deleted when the function is finished. So before, where like count was just a local variable of handle like post, the function was run, like count was created at the beginning of the function, and then destroyed once it finished executing. But since we're returning the inner function from the outer one, the inner function closes over like count, and by virtue of closure, keeps this like count variable alive. And since it's kept alive, we can dynamically make changes to it. So we can take this a step further and see that instead of just using this hard-coded value of 1 to increment the like count, we could increment it by a dynamic value. So say, for example, we wanted to pass in a certain argument to like post to determine how many times we could like a post in our app. Say, in some cases, we wanted users to be able to like a post 2 times. Well, we could pass in an argument of 2, and then we could receive that value in handle like post. We could call this steps, how much we want to step up the like count, and we can replace 1 with the value provided to step. And now when we do this, we can name the returned function add_like. Instead of like, we can name it double_like. And then if we run this 3 times and see the result here, we see now it's 2, 4, and 6. So in fact, it was double_liked or incremented by 2 every time. In other words, this shows us that these closed over variables, that closures keep the variables alive. They're not just static, like some sort of snapshot of our variables at a point in time. They're a direct link, a preservation of the variable itself. So closures can actually observe or make updates to these variables over time. And now that you see how a closure is useful, there are 2 criteria for something to be a closure, both of which you've seen right here. First, closures are a property of JavaScript functions alone. Only JavaScript functions have closures. No other data type in the language does. And second, to observe a closure, you must execute or call a function in a different scope than where function was originally defined. As we saw, we could only preserve like count when we returned add_like from the outer function, and then by virtue of a closure, we're able to keep that value alive to remember its value. So why do closures matter? Based off of what we've seen here, pause and take a stab at answering this question. Why do we care about closures as JavaScript developers? Why closures matter is because they allow us to remember values, which is very powerful. We saw it right here in this example. What use is a like count that doesn't remember likes? You'll encounter this often in your JavaScript career. You'll need to hold on to some value somehow and likely keep it separate from other values. So what do you use? A function. Why? To keep track of data over time with the help of a closure. And with that, you're already a step ahead of other developers. Most developers learn this concept of closure backwards. They're told about closure first, and they have a problem understanding it because they think it's some sort of special event that takes place.
Right, closure. So we have to have a let me keep this function. It might be really helpful for me, for you. Let's do this. Function. Call function in a different scope. So in a different scope where the function was originally defined. Okay, so closure probably of a call function in a different scope. This might be really helpful, so I'm going to type in something and look back. Here, call this, and then we do this. Save note.
Let's say it matters because they allow us to remember values, which is very...
Let me go to the toilet. Toilet break. Quick toilet break.
Very powerful. We saw it right here in this example. What use is a like count that doesn't remember likes? You'll encounter this often in your JavaScript career. You'll need to hold on to some value somehow and likely keep it separate from other values. So what do you use? A function. Why? To keep track of data over time with the help of a closure. And with that, you're already a step ahead of other developers. Most developers learn this concept of closure backwards. They're told about closure first, and they have a problem understanding it because they think it's some sort of special event that takes place, and they don't know why it matters. Why we even care about closures in the first place is that it helps us solve problems exactly like this one, where we need to remember or keep track of certain values.
I see. I will need to review this page. Yeah, I think I will end the stream here. See you guys tonight.